Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Mere Tradition. I'm your host, Kennedy Hall. Today is the second part in our Modernism series. It's been a couple weeks because I was off for some Christmas vacation, as I hope you were as well. In our last episode of this series, we talked about the persons and the history that led up to the adoption of the errors that gave us modernism. Today, we're going to recap those just a little bit and move on to the three fundamental principles of modernism, which includes agnosticism, vital immanence, and the evolution of dogma. If those terms make no sense to you, don't worry, stay tuned, and we will get into those on the other side. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, we're going to be talking about modernism today, namely the three fundamental underpinnings of the heresy. This is part of a series I'm doing here called What Happened to Catholicism, which is based on the information that is in my forthcoming book called What Happened to Catholicism. Shocker. And you can find that book available. The link for that is in the description area to the podcast. It's called What Happened to Catholicism, The Heresy Behind the Crisis, available from Sophia Institute Press, coming out in the spring. All right, so let's get into the topic at hand. I'm going to give a short recap of our first episode. You can find that on my channel, either on Substack or on YouTube or one of the podcast platforms if you're listening to audio only. We talked about the basic historical persons and ideas that led to what we would call modern philosophy, because modern philosophy is really at the root of modernism. We also went over the encyclical in general, the sort of history of the encyclical of Pope Pius X, and that encyclical is called Pascendi Dominici Gregis. We're not going to go in depth on those things because we just spent an hour doing that a couple weeks ago. So if you want to know more and you're just tuning into this episode, then check out that one. It is available on my YouTube channel, only an episode or two back on the YouTube channel. On the Substack, it's right easy to find as well. If you are on the Substack, you can actually scroll down and there is a section just for this series, which makes it really easy to navigate. In any event, brief overview. There was a heresy called nominalism that basically arose about 100 years or so after Thomas Aquinas. And as the name nominalism, nominal, suggests, it was about names. It was about nouns, what you call things. So basically, in the mind of a nominalist, something is what you call it. Whereas in the mind of somebody who follows the perennial philosophy of civilization, of Western civilization, which is really Christendom, of Thomism, of scholasticism, of Augustinianism, Platonism, any of the isms that are kind of acceptable forms of what we might call realism in philosophy, Aristotelianism, etc. We think that a thing has a nature and we call it what it is. It's not what we call it. There's a distinction there that's very important. So I'll give you an example. When you look to Scripture, and you look to the book of Genesis, and you read about God bringing the different animals or presenting the different animals to Adam, he names them. Now, this does not mean that he says, oh, I have a perception that this thing with white body and black spots seems to me like it should be called cow because there's something cowy about it. That's not what it means. It means he knows what it is by its nature, so he calls it by its proper name. He doesn't make up a name to represent what he thinks it looks like. He calls it what it is because it has a nature and an essence. This is denied in nominalism. Nominalism gives us transgenderism. I would say you are born a male or a female, not because you look like a male or a female. In fact, you might not look that feminine or that masculine, either because of unfortunate things or just major burns or something. You could be totally disfigured, not really look like a female or a male at all. But you are a male and a female regardless of your externals because your nature is male, your nature is female. This is denied by nominalism. This is a very quick overview. That heresy was espoused largely by William of Ockham, who we spoke about at length in the former episode of the last episode, so check out that video if you need to. Fast forward real fast here to the era of modern philosophy, and remember, this is just a recap, so you need more information, you go back. You have basically the Holy Trinity, the unholy Trinity of modern philosophy. You have René Descartes, who was a Catholic, and I don't think he died a heretic or anything like that. I'm not sure. But his philosophy had major problems that became real big problems in modern philosophy. So you had René Descartes, you had Immanuel Kant, and you had Georg or George Hegel. Why were these men problems? Well, René Descartes, famous for his cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Seems pretty innocuous, doesn't it? Seems like it's not that big of a deal. Here's the problem. He was on a quest to find out what existence was. How does he know that he exists? These fundamental questions. They say he locked himself in some sort of box, or he locked himself maybe in a stove that didn't have any flames in it, of course. It was something along those lines. The details are a little bit sketchy depending on where you look. But either way, he isolated himself in a really small, confined space and wouldn't come out until he was certain he existed. First of all, sane people don't do that. That's one thing to think about. But he came out and basically had this epiphany while he was in there, and it was, I think, therefore I am. So basically, I'm certain I exist because I'm thinking of my existence. That means basically I'm the starting point for existence. It might not seem like that, but this leads to, rather than reality exists, I conform to it. It's I know reality because I find it inside my head. That's kind of what that becomes. Maybe he didn't believe that. Maybe that's not what he wanted it to become, but that's kind of what it had become. And what he did is he basically flipped philosophy upside down. Because it began in the internal rather than being something that our internal mechanisms would conform to, because what existed primarily was outside of us. That was kind of the understanding that he flipped around. Fast forward, and then we have Kant and Hegel. Kant basically tries to turn subjectivism, because what you get from this Cartesian idea is that it begins with the subject, and it's not beginning with the object, it's beginning with the subject. It's subjective. He's turning this subjectivism into a system. And Kant's ideas, there's like a joke in philosophy faculties that nobody understands Immanuel Kant, not even the Kantians, whatever. It's really complicated. I don't recommend going and reading it because it'll drive you insane. But he comes up with these, and he was very intelligent, but he comes up with these highly sophisticated ways of basically being sure about reality, even though we are subjectively sure about reality itself, and it's just whatever. And he tries to answer a lot of moral questions. So he gives us things like the categorical imperative, which is kind of like a Kantian version of the golden rule. Nonetheless, he still wrestles with this problem of subjectivity. And the thing is, when you believe that truth and reality is kind of subjective, you have to come up with this hard fact that you deal with things that are not subjective, like you hit your head and it happens. So how do you deal with that? Well, it's not that simple. So when you're trying to follow that philosophy, there was a contemporary / follower of a follower in time of Kant called George Hegel. He's most famous for his Hegelian dialectic. Hegel was also kind of a pantheist, which is someone who doesn't really believe there's a separation between creator and creature and so forth. It's very Eastern, even though he was German. But basically the Hegelian synthesis or the Hegelian dialectic is basically you have thesis and antithesis, so pro and con, or for and against, or whatever. Red and blue, and you smash together, and you have thesis, antithesis, so the thing that's opposed to the thing that's opposed to the thing, and the thing coming together, and then you have out of this the synthesis, the higher thing. There is a truth to that. We do see that with certain things, but the problem is that because there's subjectivity in the air about philosophy and truth, basically what you get is relativism. So it's kind of like truth and untruth. It's 1 + 1 is 2 + 2 + 2. 1 + 1 is 2, and 1 + 1 is 3, smashed together to get the new math thing. And it doesn't necessarily mean that always the Hegelian method turns out to be absurd, but it can often become absurd. And really, this is the metaphysical basis for evolution. Opposites coming together to wage in this war, and then eventually you have the more evolved thing coming out of it, which is basically what it's saying. And then this sort of metaphysical notion of Hegel gets applied to biology, and then you have the basically the theory of evolution in the biological sciences. All philosophical science, all natural sciences are undergirded by philosophical assumptions. There's no such thing as purely scientific. It doesn't exist. Just using language and having grammar means you're actually following logic that has a system to it that you agree upon in order to use it, because language is not random. So you can't even do science without doing philosophy, because you can't use grammar without using logic, which is an ordered way of knowing things. Anyway, so this gets picked up. The natural sciences pick up Hegel, and we get basically the theory of evolution. That's pretty much kind of the Cole's notes of it. That's only 10 minutes or 8 minutes of talking about this. There's way more that I talked about in the last episode, but that's enough of a recap so that we can get into the topic at hand here. So I'm going to bring up the notes for today's topic, which is we're going to talk about the three foundations of agnosticism, vital immanence, and the evolution of dogma, and we'll talk about examples of how we see this in the church today. All right, so today we're talking about, as I said, these three things, and just scroll down there for a second. So we're talking really about the underpinning philosophy of modernism. And I wrote here that we have agnosticism as foundation, because it really is foundational. So agnosticism is the belief that human reason cannot know God or divine matters beyond phenomena. So basically, to break this down, you've heard the term agnostic before. Perhaps you were a university student, or you've known people who've gone to university and they come back after their first year philosophy thing and they're so smart because, it's Thanksgiving and they've learned for a month and a half. So clearly now they're a genius. And, they're like, I'm an agnostic. I just can't believe in organized religion, blah, 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 blah. Who can really know what's true? I mean, everyone has their own stories, and who's to say? And I'm not denying I'm an atheist, but I'm an agnostic, That's one way of using the word, but it's actually more fundamental than that, because what's at the heart of someone who makes a claim like that? They're basically saying, we can't actually know the absolute truth about things, which they're saying an absolute statement, but they kind of forget that part. And they are agnostic, meaning gnosis is knowledge, A is indifferent towards. It's not anti-theist, it's agnostic about God, basically, about religious things. And so agnosticism, as I said, is the belief that human reason cannot know God or divine matters beyond phenomena. The thing is, again, as I said, if you follow this Kantian idea where you're going to have the subjectivity, if you're following Descartes, where he's basically not even sure if he exists and he wants to figure that out, he comes to this conclusion where, because thinking is happening, he's real. I think, therefore I am. Well, what is thinking? It's a phenomenon. It's something happening. What is a phenomenon? It's something happening. It's a intellectual phenomenon. It's something happening in his mind, in his brain. Things are going on. And he says, because things are going on, I'm going on. So you can't really know God or divine matters or reality in general beyond the phenomenon, so the stuff that's happening. So this really throws out the window. This really throws out metaphysics, basically. And I wrote here as well that modernists limit human reason to the realm of phenomena, denying the possibility of knowing God through reason or science. And this is a big thing. This is against the First Vatican Council, by the way, where it's emphatic and infallibly so, that you can know the existence of God with pure reason, or just reason alone. The issue is, when you say you're only going to know things by phenomena, as I said, you basically throw out metaphysics, because metaphysics exists in the realm of principles that are subject to laws. And again, there is an inherent contradiction in this agnosticism, because they're using language to do stuff, and language necessarily uses grammar, and grammar necessarily requires systems of order that if you don't follow them, it doesn't work. Anyway, there is a law to how language works. In fact, people used to study grammar as, when you would say you would study grammar, it was basically like studying how to think. Anyway, nonetheless, the contradictions aside, or shortcomings aside of these thinkers, basically, if you get rid of metaphysics, if you get rid of this idea that you can know certain truths by thinking about them, by observing laws of thought, laws of unseen things, that must be in place, you basically have to become a materialist. Ultimately, it's sort of like you can't actually look at a history book and say we know what's true in here because people have said they saw it. You have to look at a history book and say, well, I can only believe this is true if I assess this in light of archaeology. I have to show the phenomena took place in order to really know that that thing happened. Because again, this is the kind of problem that these agnostic types get into, is they basically become relativists and subjectivists, but then when they hit their head, they say, oh, that wall must be real, because my ouchie is real. So that's a phenomenon. They can say, well, that's that, I can know that for certain because the thing smacked me in the head. But if I read about somebody getting smacked in the head 1,000 years ago, unless I find the weapon and I can dig up his body and get the DNA on it and blah, 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 excavate this, excavate that, and find the skull fracture, I can't actually trust that that's true, because really we just have something that is stated, not something that it's not proof of experience. That's kind of what agnosticism comes down to. So when you do this with religion, obviously we can't trust the Bible. How could we? We can't trust anything. We can't trust ourselves, which again shows how absurd this whole thing is. But doesn't matter. Modern philosophy is absurd, and it's all really stupid. And people become stupid by following it, but they sound smart, so it fools people. But that's agnosticism, basically. It's really not that complicated. It is, as I said, the belief that human reason cannot know God or divine matters beyond phenomena. So here's the thing: we also have to account for the fact that this is true, but human beings are universally religious, because these modernist type thinkers, these modern philosophical type thinkers, it's not that they're morons in the sense of they're not intelligent. They are highly intelligent. There's a great talk, I can't remember which one, but it's by Father Hess, God rest his soul, and Father Gregory Hess. And he was talking about how people misunderstand the gifts of God, and that people have gifts based on how they're made. And they basically just choose whether or not they're going to use them. So this is why often you can have extremely intelligent individuals who are completely godless. Like think of a man like Elon Musk. Elon Musk is so smart. He's so smart. Whatever you may think about his conclusion on certain things, his ability to be a smarty pants is really high. And there's many such cases. He seems to be on a journey, and hopefully he goes all the way and becomes a Catholic, and who knows, and whatever, but he's definitely more or less been an ally of people like yourself and myself, and as far as the culture is concerned. But he's extremely intelligent. Many people receive gifts. They just use them wrongly. God doesn't take away your ability to be a smarty pants just because you're an atheist. You were born and given gifts by God for, not in a determinist sense where, other people can't also be really smart if they don't have gifts, but you just have something about you, There's no, just like some people can run faster and jump higher and whatever, some people really do just have the ability to think faster. Just kind of how it is. There's no fairness since the fall. And even then, there's still a hierarchy in heaven. There's a hierarchy to nature because there's a hierarchy to supernature, and you may use that place in the hierarchy of being super smart in a bad way, the same way that Lucifer used his height as an angel in a bad way. So these philosophers that give us modern philosophy, they are not dummies. But they're trying to understand reality, and they're looking at religion and they're going, everybody's religious. Religion itself is a phenomenon, is the point. It's a phenomenon, religion's like hunger. It's like something that is in everybody and has to be satiated, and that's something that they have a trouble accounting for, because with the physical stuff that's purely physical, that's easy. It's like, okay, well, they want to procreate, so X, Y, and Z. They want to eat, so X, Y, and Z, They have a need for safety, so they do these sorts of things. I mean, you can analyze human beings and human history when it comes to like the natural phenomenon pretty simply, because you just kind of see cause and effect or whatever. The thing about religion, though, is that it's something that to the observers is purely interior. Like you don't actually see the change in someone's soul because of the effect of sanctifying